Hi, everybody. I'm excited about this 5-part series coming up. And today we're going to do an overview of it. But when you think about it, future-proofing, upset prevention, and recovery training, that's not really a concept that comes up very often. But we're going to talk about 5 key stages of future-proofing your upset prevention and recovery training competencies. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Five key stages of effective future-proofing of upset prevention recovery training is kind of a unique approach to a very difficult topic, which is the mitigation of the risk of loss of control in flight. Now, when you're doing upset prevention recovery training, what we do not want to have is simply a 10-minute sidebar topic that you address in your initial and recurrent training that happens and goes away, and you don't give it the dedicated focus that it requires as the number one threat to air safety, responsible for typically more than 50% of fatalities in aviation, no matter what sector or part of aviation you come from. Loss of control in flight is a complex risk that requires a comprehensive mitigation. There's this old saying that for every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. Hi, everybody. My name is Paul B.J. Ransbury. I am an 8-time master certified flight instructor, former fighter pilot and airline pilot, but most importantly, I am the CEO and founder of Aviation Performance Solutions, or simply APS. I'm really excited about this series that we call Future-Proofing Your Pro Pilot Upset Training. It's going to be interesting and fun, and we're going to go through this process together. For those of you that don't know APS, our purpose is simple. We help pilots bring everyone home safely. And we accomplish that by 30 years of specialization in upset prevention and recovery training, the number one mitigation of the risk of loss of control in flight. Key partners for APS includes corporate flight departments, major air carriers, government agencies, insurance organizations, and even flight schools. So we're excited about this today. So my invitation for you, since today is an overview of those 5 topics, is I'm inviting you to each one of those 5 sessions, and I'm going to make it easy for you. There's a QR code in each of the slides as we go through these that you can click on, and you can sign up for the event or watch the on-demand event, depending on when you're watching it. So we invite your feedback, and I'm going to talk about that as we go through the slides in a few minutes. Okay, let's go ahead and jump in to session 1. So the way we're going to be looking at this is we're going to look at it in 5 parts. So you'll see those now. If we go to the slide, you can see that the first one is the role of recurrent upset prevention and recovery training. It's kind of odd to start with the end, but we do want to do that because one of the key interventions, one of the key areas of essentially being effective at future-proofing is recurrent training. Then we're going to talk about the power of jet upset training, specifically for jet pilots. The third one is applied root causes, where we jump into the risk itself and we track that from the hazard through the layers of mitigation to the risk or the outcome of loss of control in flight. The fourth one is human factors, which are just so very important that you have a resilience in crisis to be able to access your skill sets. And then we're going to bring it all together, all 4 of the preceding sessions, into the 5th one, where we talk about what the UPRT mastery framework looks like. Now, I want to emphasize to folks, okay, is that we want your feedback. So more than any other time, more than any other session, please take time to put your comments into whatever platform you're watching on, whether that's LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. Put those comments in on what you think you'd like to see in each of these sessions, or just a topic you'd like us to address next time, because we do read those and we do take them very, very seriously. So please try to be engaged throughout this process. Okay, so let's jump into the first one, okay, the role of recurrent upset prevention and recovery training. So the way it's going to work is I'm going to bring up the cover slide, and for each one of those is a QR code at the bottom right that you can use your phone to either sign up for the event if it hasn't happened yet or watch the on-demand event right away. So the role of recurrent upset prevention recovery training is going to feature our one-day Gold Pro UPRT Mastery recurrent qualification, just because it's a great example of how you can approach your recurrent training. Now, we're going to be talking about how we top up our skills, fill in the gaps, looking at what your initial training was, what you need to double down on, what might have been missed based on what, where, and how you operate. But another thing in recurrent upset training is make sure you get realigned with industry best practices from national aviation authorities or overarching organizations like ICAO. But as we mentioned earlier, it's really important that you continue to evolve your skills to the current fleet type you're operating in and the kind of operations. The way we address that is we say that your training, initial and recurrent, should be really designed around what, where, and how you operate. Okay, let's now go ahead and jump into session 2. And this one is the power of jet upset training. And this is going to feature our Marchetti S211 jet, which is a great proven example of an all-attitude, all-envelope capable on-aircraft jet training platform that we have seen be super, super powerful. And in fact, we would consider it the superior number one platform in the industry for doing on-aircraft jet upset training in a complex airplane. So in this session, we're going to talk about the critical role of having that all-attitude, all-envelope capability and the importance of using a complex airplane, because really jet training, especially on-aircraft jet training, is what jet pilots need, although that's not the only solution. Need to focus on transferable skills, bridging the gap between previous experience or previous platforms, from piston to turboprop to jet engine airplanes to business jets to transport category airplanes. And most importantly, in jet training, you need to have high altitude training to really understand that performance contrast between low, medium, and high altitude training. All right, let's move on to session number 3. So we're going through these quickly, but let's get to applied root causes. And we're going to be featuring what we call the LOCI, or Loss of Control in Flight Escalation Spectrum. Now, this is going to be a great study at looking at the safety risk management process, specifically starting with the hazards that have a risk or outcome of loss of control in flight. So it's going to be really valuable if you are a safety officer or you're a risk management type of a person and understand risk management. We're going to be going right up your alley on this. So we're going to see the complexity of loss of control in flight and the number of root causes or hazards associated with that, to have a really deep understanding of this threat, and to circle back to how we started this presentation on the complexity of this risk. And so one of the big wins out of session 3, and again, there's the QR code right there, is it really focuses in on the futility of trying to cherry pick a hazard, thinking that is going to solve loss of control in flight. That is a pretty grand assumption for a situation or a risk like loss of control that has over 20 identified hazards that have a risk or an outcome of loss of control. So just by eliminating distraction or complacency or cross-check or even a thunderstorm in no way guarantees or eliminates the risk of loss of control in flight. This is the exact application of that opening quote that I used. For every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong. And we're going to talk about how that applies in this situation. Now, I bet there's going to be comments on that because that's a controversial statement, but it's just what we've seen over 30 years of trying to mitigate this risk and being out in the industry. Okay, let's quickly get into session number 4. So session number 4 is on that all-important human factors. In fact, this entire series could be just on human factors. We could have started with human factors. The real important aspect of human factors is that we have to develop a resilience in crisis. Now, that's kind of a throwaway word these days. What do we mean by resilience in crisis? Well, in this context, we mean that you have the ability to get access to your skill set in a situation where you're potentially being threatened with psychophysiological incapacitation. So we're going to have a human factors expert joining us in session 4. We're going to talk about the process of habituation, How long does it take? What are the phases of that leading to overlearning? We're going to talk about the amygdala hijack, that internal panic button that we have in our brains. And then we're going to talk about the critical importance of getting access to your competencies in crisis. Because one thing I will tell you before we move on to number 5 is that the easiest things to do when we're in this situation, the very easiest thing to do when we're teaching somebody upset prevention and recovery training is what to do and how to do it. Now that's interesting, right? Because that's not what everybody thinks. The easiest thing to do when you're teaching upset training is what to do and how to do it. The most difficult thing to effectively ingrain is actually getting access to those skills in a crisis in spite of the incapacitating human factors. Okay, let's move on to session 5 because this is a great one. This is where now we're going to talk about how we integrate all those first 4 sessions together into true lifelong mastery, the UPRT mastery framework. And that is really comprised of very informed initial UPRT training design, recurrent UPRT training design, and even beyond. And so what do we mean by beyond? Well, it really is intentional risk management. So every stage of your implementation of UPRT, no matter what stage of your career you are in, the design of that program needs to be based on what you are currently operating, where you are operating it, and how you're operating it. So the what is easy. Are you flying a piston airplane, a turboprop airplane, transport category, business jet, single engine, multi-engine? Now the where is also interesting as well. Are you VFR only? Are you mostly IMC operations? Are you operating at high altitude? And then the all-important area is how are you operating? And a great example of that is, are you operating as a crew? Because the vast majority of upset prevention recovery training is done single pilot. But the real world for most operators or many operators out there is you need to be able to work together as a team. And we're going to talk about how that and many other factors are important. So in addition to that, we're going to be doubling down on awareness and prevention and how those are the primary mitigations of loss of control in flight. And while recovery is important, its primary value is giving more power and insight to the phases of awareness and prevention, that 3D modeling that your brain needs to understand to intervene early in a developing airplane upset. We'll be talking about the really intangible benefits that we don't think about very much, but can be the most important things in effective upset prevention recovery training, like manual flight operations proficiency, improving your judgment, your responsiveness in crisis, aeronautical decision-making, threat and error management, CRM, SRM. It's a great, great session. So please join me on that. Okay, folks, before we wrap up here, you can see now the QR code on the left on the slide. That is the session you are watching right now. There are the 5 events that I'd like you to join me on. And here are the QR codes to do that, where you can either sign up now if we haven't done the event yet, or go and watch the on-demand event right now. But again, I encourage you, even if it's on demand, go ahead and put your comments into those streams, because we are going to be looking at those and shaping the training that we do in the future. And we'd love to have you at the next session. So let me end with this. Each of these sessions is really and truly an opportunity for you to strengthen, refine, and truly future-proof your skills in a way that's going to serve you throughout your career. Now, whether you're flying a piston aircraft, a turboprop airplane, an airliner, or a business jet, UPRT is truly foundational to your safety and to your growth as a pilot. So my invitation is that together we're going to address these 5 key future-proofing stages. And I want to really support that foundation that you're dedicated to putting in place for yourself and those you fly with. So I and APS will be here at each step of the way to answer your questions. Be active, put comments in, share your insights, and we're going to be here to help you get the most out of these sessions. So again, I invite you to join me. I want you to participate, be active, share your experiences. Your commitment to safe, skilled flying is what inspires everything we do here at APS, why we come to work every day. And we're here to support you on that path. So thank you for your dedication, and I look forward to working together with you, and so does our team. Let's jump into questions. All right. Well, before we go to questions, I have Randy Brooks joining me, and I'm going to introduce Randy here in just a second. But a big thanks to Carrie, who's our control room operator. She's there fielding questions, and you can see her in the chat stream as well. If you are enjoying the session, please feel free to like the session and follow us. It would be wonderful. We're going to be doing this weekly through until the end of the year on this series. And if you missed the live sessions, which honestly most people do, the replay is going to be available. The one question we do have is there a replay available? Actually, the replay is available right now. You can actually go and refresh your screen and start watching it right from the beginning. So it's wonderful. All right, so let me introduce Randy Brooks. He's our Executive Vice President of Flight Operations here at APS. He's a Platinum Pro APS Advanced UPRT instructor. He's also in the Air Show Hall of Fame, and he can talk about that a little bit. But Randy has a lot of experience in upset prevention and recovery training. In fact, he started the Eclipse program in the L39 many, many years ago, and gosh, a decade now. Randy, it's been a long time. He's certainly a huge aviation advocate and safety champion. In fact, we were just chatting this morning, just got back from getting checked out in the T6. So, Randy, do you want to talk a little bit about yourself? And then we can chat about the 5 topics in this series on future proofing.
Well, I think you've done enough talking about me, but I think the important thing, BJ, is that, as you said, we could have and will be having complete presentations on each of these areas. And I know that a lot of the information that we'll be sharing is information that you and I and others have helped to develop over the last 10 years. A lot of it is new and will probably be very interesting to aviators out that are listening to us today.
Well, let me bring up those sessions there right now. So the one in recurrent, why don't you talk a little bit about recurrent, Randy, and what you see there? I think I've shared my perspective, but what are your feelings on that, and what do you feel is important for pilots to understand about that process?
Well, I think all pilots are familiar with currency requirements for landings, for night flying, for instrument approaches. And this is really no different. We know that UPRT is a perishable skill. It's not something that is used on a regular basis. And so I'm kind of surprised by the folks that have been flying with us for a number of years and are often coming back for their 3rd, 4th recurrent program. There are always little things that we can polish up, and it shows why they're coming back to constantly be reminded.
Yeah, and the one thing I like about our recurrent program here at APS is we always consider the totality of training. So, for example, if you go through initial training, and let's say for time or budget reasons, let's say you're operating as a business jet pilot, but you only got piston training on aircraft training, well, we're going to take a look at that, and we're going to design your current to fill in the gaps of the areas of risk mitigation that have been left on the table just by that previous decision. So the ongoing process of recurrent not only can fill in your skills and refresh your skills, but really miss areas of your operation that weren't mitigated during the initial training, which is really exciting for everybody.
Yeah, I really enjoy working with people on recurrent because it's all becomes kind of customized at that point. We're working with what kind of aircraft they have, whether or not they've seen any reasons where they've used the information, and trying to pick up where we left off and kind of move folks on to the next level.
So we're seeing a massive transition, Randy, from our customers from a more traditional piston simulation now into the jet. In fact, it's and for the right reasons, because the vast majority of the folks that we work with here at APS are jet operators. And so they're seeing the value of integrating that into their process. So maybe one dimension to talk about that we didn't specifically mention in this particular overview was the value of high altitude jet upset training in the real airplane. Do you want to chat about that just for a little bit?
Yeah, I know. I like talking to our students and asking them how much time they've spent hand flying in RVSM airspace above 29,000, flight level 290. And the answer is very, very little. And we know that the modeling in flight simulators is probably a little suspect. There wasn't a whole lot of flight test work probably put into the aero models that the simulator is programmed with up there. So its representation of the reduced aerodynamic damping that they have up at high altitude is limited. And so it's always a very eye-opening experience. And it's really kind of interesting. That's where most professional pilots are spending most of their time, up in the flight levels. And yet they might not be well equipped for how the airplane is going to behave if it's outside of the normal envelope, if the autopilot is not on and they're experiencing an unexpected upset event. And so that's a very, very helpful way of practically taking skills that are learned and practiced down at lower altitudes and applying up there and showing them the differences.
Well, I just added the QR codes for those various sessions there. So anybody who's going through the Q&A session now and you look to join those events, that's the code for each one of those. And as I mentioned, if you sign up before the event goes live, then you'll be getting a notification when that happens. But depending on when you watch this session, some or all of those could be complete already. So you can go and visit those sessions and see the on-demand version of those. So root causes of loss of control in flight, Randy, is our session 3. And we have this concept that we've championed at APS to help clarify the complexity of the risk spectrum that people face and pilots face every single day, identifying nearly 20 hazards that have a risk or an outcome of loss of control in flight to really help shape what a comprehensive mitigation of this really complex risk takes. Because, I've seen many times where we'll be in meetings, we'll be at events, and there will be a statement, something to the effect of, if we could just eliminate distraction, we would eliminate the risk of loss of control in flight. And when you take a look at the escalation spectrum, you see that's just one, and as I mentioned, one of 20 hazards that have a risk or an outcome of loss of control. Any comments on that?
Yeah, BJ, I think that this session really kind of illustrates something that is important about all 5 of these sessions, which is that for most people who do their unusual attitude training, their approach to stall training as part of 142 training, they just don't have the time to delve into it with the degree of specificity that we do here at APS, where we have the good fortune to focus on this subject area 5 days a week and really dig down. And so that's where I think some of those limited understandings for some people come from. And, in addition to the flying skills that people are going to use as part of UPRT, the understanding of how the escalation spectrum develops really helps in terms of awareness and prevention, that side of upset prevention and recovery training, and has people leaving with a much better understanding of how they could get into an upset, and also has a large deterrent value, in trying to keep them from actually getting to the point where they have to use some of the recovery skills that they will practice here with us.
Excellent. And before we talk briefly about human factors, just want everybody to know that's online with us here today. Nice to see worldwide, from Brazil to UK to other areas of Europe. Just really exciting to see always the worldwide impact that we have. Is that if you do have a question, go ahead and stick it in there. But even if you're watching the on-demand version, post your question into the comment area and we will answer those. We'll come back and visit this stream. And again, anything you feel like you'd like to see in these sessions coming up, the 5 sessions, or a completely new session in 2025. We're very active on LinkedIn with our live events. We're here to freely share our expertise, our 3 decades of expertise in upset prevention and recovery training, because we're here to save lives. That's what it's all about for us. So on the topic of saving lives, Randy, why don't you just go ahead and give your perspective on the important role of human factors training and being resilient in crisis. We mentioned that at a high level in the overview, but we have a whole dedicated session to that.
BJ, this is one of the most underappreciated elements of the loss of control in flight problem. And the reason for that is that the environment that most people are practicing, as I mentioned, the limited skills that we have in the simulator, you just simply cannot replicate the human factors that are going to actually be present in the domain where an upset is going to be experienced, which is in the air. And so as much as any of the subject areas that we have these presentations on, this is the one that I know you and I and others have come to understand is really foundational to the problem, and that if pilots don't receive training that covers the human factors aspects, then no matter how smart they are from a reading standpoint, or they are at 1G in a classroom, it's not going to make a difference in the sky when they are confronted with a situation that their normal licensing training has not prepared them for, in a degree of complexity that the simulator simply cannot create. And so this is one of the areas where I feel like science has been increasingly showing us the cognitive impacts of surprise and startle. I know I was listening to our director of flight operations, DQ Care, who's presented yesterday at Bombardier Safety Stand Down, and he was reading from Advisory Circular 120, 123 about the deficit that they've seen in manual flight operations proficiency in these kind of high stress environments. And that just kind of hit it on the head, where if people haven't practiced this in the real world, then they're going to be let down if they ever have to deal with an upset event.
Excellent. Great to see Savio just joined us from Dubai. So great to have Savio always. He's just a huge champion of effective upset prevention and recovery training. So on the topic of human factors, Randy, we always say the been there, seen that value. It's all about the been there, felt that, been there, experienced that. Because when it comes to human factors, the fidelity of the motion cueing, of the surprise, the startle, no matter how hard you try to accomplish that in a simulator, it simply is not at all the same as in the real world getting training on aircraft training. So being able to have access to those skill sets in spite of what's going on around you is really the key to that. Because if you don't have that discipline, if you can't overcome those human factors, startle, surprise, and fear, it won't matter what level of training you have. You simply won't be able to access those skill sets. Anything to add on that before we close with the UPRT Mastery Framework, Randy?
Yeah, I would like to point out that it's very gratifying to work with students that would not be capable of handling certain dynamic events that they're presented with, that by the end of training are able to respond to that in a reliable, predictable, safe and effective manner. And that just comes from being confronted with the actual human factors that they're going to have to subdue in the real world.
Excellent. Well, let's wrap it up here with session 5, and we talked about that in the overview. Now, the UPRT Mastery Framework is really a culmination of years, if not decades, of work by APS. And I think the cool thing that I really like about APS is we freely share all of our approaches. Many years ago in 2019, the Every Pilot in Control Solution Standard, which is the fundamental core framework of effective upset prevention and recovery training, it wasn't a secret that we kept to ourselves. We put it out in the industry and we simply said, hey, the regulators have done a fantastic job of what to do, but the devil's in the details. Here's how to do it effectively. And what the UPRT Mastery Framework represents, it addresses that. It talks about the power of initial training and how that needs to be designed, and also the recurrent training to not only fill in any gaps that got missed in initial training, or if you've changed fleet types or even categories of airplane from a piston to a jet aircraft or multi-engine aircraft, to be sure that in an ongoing manner, you're continuing to assess your risk and mitigate it. Any final thoughts on that, Randy, before we wrap for today?
Yeah, what I really appreciate about the UPRT Mastery Framework that APS is going to explain in this presentation is it's going to make a lot of sense to people. It lays out the gaps that we have in regular licensing training in a very systematic way that will make sense to pilots, depending on the type of operation, the type of equipment that they fly, and hones in with precision on exactly the skills, the platforms, the training that is required to try and reduce the threat of loss of control in flight. Because the whole point of all of this training, this presentation, is that this isn't the second or third leading cause of fatalities. It's the number one cause in every sector of aviation. And that UPRT Mastery Framework, as much as anything, shows how hard APS is working to identify all of the available platforms and apply them in the way that's going to reduce the risk of loss of control in flight for the folks that work with us to the greatest extent possible.
And probably the best news is these sessions are going to be a maximum of 30 minutes. So we're going to be putting the content up in the first 10 to 15 minutes, make it open for questions. But we do anticipate and expect that these are going to be ongoing resources where folks can put in their questions or comments, reach out to us, and continue to evolve these sessions moving forward. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody who joined us online today and the many hundreds that are going to be joining later in the on-demand version around the world. And Randy, thank you for joining. I think it's been a good session. Any final words of wisdom before we go to the outro?
I'm just glad that we have this technology where we are able to share the lessons learned here at APS to a greater, broader audience to try and help those life-saving skills be distributed as widely as possible.
Thanks, Randy, and thank you everybody for being here. We will see you next week.